Welcome into a new edition of Going Deep Buffalo on the Built in Buffalo Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Massare, here with Kevin Siracuse. We got some offensive things to talk about today. Got some of my draft thoughts to talk about today. A lot of sports around the league going on right now in a lot of different networks and a lot of different things happening. We got a schedule release next week to talk about. But as always, this show is brought to you by the Summit Center, some of the best autism care in Western New York.
And tonight's show is also brought to you by Dave Dengler and the Larson-Timko Funeral Home in Fredonia. Larson-Timko Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can visit their website at larsontimkofuneralhome.com or give them a call at 716-679-9000.
Great to talk Bills football. A lot of things happening over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we had the draft. We broke down our thoughts last week. It was a good show. I was producing in the background last week. We also had some really good, I was on the Founders Pod last weekend breaking down some of my thoughts around the draft, specific to the receiver position. And we have some offensive changes. What will happen on the offense? I think the offensive line has made some big progress. We'll get into that and what we think we see from Aaron Cromer and a brand new Bills embedded last night, Kevin. So a lot's happening, right?
Yes, and my Knicks are tipping off right now for Game 2 against Indiana, and I haven't even checked, but the Yankees are winning again, right?
Absolutely.
And we have the NHL playoffs, so it's definitely a great time of the year to be a sports fan, and the weather is nice, so that just is an added bonus right there. Now, we were planning on talking about the schedule because we thought it was coming out tomorrow, so we were originally going to be predicting the schedule right now. That can get put on the back burner. And I think it's fitting now that we have a little bit extra time because you haven't been able to give us your draft takes yet, Kevin, because you weren't here last week. And then, we did day 3, so we had hours of coverage. But after it's all settled in, how are you feeling about the 2024 draft class of the Bills?
I'm feeling pretty good. Like, I had a chance to kind of spread my thoughts around both on our show day 3. Obviously, we were live for most of the day. As well as the Founders Pod and a couple other places that we've been able to break down our thoughts. But I think as you reflect on it, the Bills really did take an approach of BPA. They definitely wanted to fill their needs in the first round with Keon Coleman. It was fairly easy to see that pick was always going to be receiver. The Bills felt pretty comfortable with from the BTJ all the way to like Ladd McConkey. They felt like there was probably a range in there that they were definitely going to get a guy that they felt was appropriate. And then Cole Bishop, like we saw last night on the embedded series, the Bills really wanted Cole Bishop. So that makes me excited. It makes me feel way better than like, we just had to take a guy. We didn't know what to do. Let's take a safety here, whatever. We need a safety. They were calling up for many picks, kind of reminiscent of when they wanted Osiris Torrance last year and reminiscent of a few picks that the Bills have made in their past. So for them to really have a plan for Cole Bishop, and by all accounts, I would assume as a day 1 starter, the Bills wouldn't have given up additional assets to try to come up to get him had they not have fairly big plans for him, Kevin. So that's, I think, the first thing that jumped out to me is how much that they wanted Cole Bishop in this offense. And then look, Keon Coleman's done everything right so far to this point. He's made really good, interviews. He's a very likable guy. People are, watching a lot of his film and breaking down how he's faster and gets more separation than, just his 40 time. So there's a lot of things to be excited for. And then obviously the relationship with Josh Allen is a budding relationship. All the awesome things coming out about Dwayne Carter and what he's going to be able to do was one of our targets. We picked him on this show. We picked Dwayne Carter and Cole Bishop just a little bit later than they went. But it was good to know that we were on the same page as Brandon Beane with seeing the fits there on the offense. The defense. I expect both of them to make big strides. And finishing off the defense, you got Olafosio and Solomon. A couple of really good-looking players that I think make this team, and I think actually a part of the rotation, and in some way. And then obviously my guy Hardy was the second best punt returner scorer in college football. Going to be an immediate contributor, and many people say he could be an immediate contributor to be a backup slot corner. So I'm pretty excited about their additions there. The Bills felt pretty good about their boundary corner position, only adding to the slot, which was needed. And I think that they upgraded there and they upgraded on special teams. And then offensively, Cedric, Van Pran Granger, one of my favorite draft choices, 3rd round grade. I have no idea how he went in the 5th round. I didn't even expect him to be there. I didn't think the Bills would even have a chance at him in their 4th round choice. So I didn't talk about him too much in our pre-draft coverage just because they didn't have a pick. Remember, the Bills didn't have a pick in the 3rd round. and not till the late four. So I didn't expect the Bills to really have a chance at him. But I think he's very much so my third center. He has a chance to start. He's a tiny bit undersized, but does everything well, won 2 national championships. So he's who I'm really excited about. And Ray Davis, another great addition, running back 2 right off the bat, has a great story. I expect him to come in and produce, be a productive pass catching receiver, help on third downs, and be a nice complement to James Cook. So the Bills really did check every box, minus maybe another receiver. So is that kind of where you've had more time to think about it in your show last week? Is that kind of where you left it? Are you still feeling pretty good about the class as a whole?
Yeah. Now when I gave my grades last week, we gave a 2-hour show, and in your absence, we had Izzy and Anthony Romeo come on, and they did a great job. So we had a great 2-hour conversation, and at the end, we gave our grades, and we were all around that B range. So that's where my final grade was. I'm giving Brandon Beane a solid B because I think he filled a lot of holes. He did a lot of good things well, but I don't think that he necessarily hit this out of the park. There wasn't that splash move where it's like, yes, we got Brian Thomas. We traded up for Rome Odunze. There wasn't that type of move. Now, this draft can turn into an A or an A plus draft because maybe these players like Van Pran Granger, with the value that you got there, Javon Solomon, all those guys, especially on Saturday, if they turn out to be really good picks, then you're going to look back on this draft and say, man, Bean really crushed it. But for now, I can't say that because there's just that uncertainty at the wide receiver position. So I think that kind of transitions us into the next question that I want to ask you, because our topic of discussion tonight is about the Bills offense and how much it's going to change and whether it's going to be a philosophical change or not. So before we get into that, how did you feel about only drafting Keon Coleman? Because I was thinking right along, I can't remember if we were live for this or not, but Troy Franklin was sitting right there. And I think there was a reason why he was slipping. And he ended up going early round 4 to Denver. I think that's a good fit for him, reuniting with Bo Nix. But I wanted them to double dip. And he was right there. They took Dwayne Carter. Okay, cool. That was another position of need. He's the immediate backup to Ed Oliver. But they passed on multiple guys like Malik Washington, Taj Washington. I think both those guys went to Miami, actually. Devontae Walker, Brendan Rice. A lot of these guys who were on our radar, I know specifically your radar. So how do you feel about not double dipping and essentially just saying, we're good. We're going to rock what we have. And then they signed Chase Claypool, which we will also be getting to.
Yeah, we got, Quintez Cephas and Chase Claypool. This is what I've said on the receiver position. They needed to double dip, in my opinion. I was close to double dipping prior to Diggs. After Diggs, I thought it was a foregone conclusion that they double dip. I didn't necessarily think it needed to be 1 and 2. The Bills absolutely had a plan for Cole Bishop. They were probably planning Cole Bishop in the second for most of this draft process. It seems like that was, outside of him going super early or something, that seemed like that was their process. So it was really when they made that deal to trade back and acquire that extra third, and then had the fourth as well. They needed a running back, so it was cool with them. So the running back started to go off the board as we were live on the show. So they needed to select a running back in the fourth. I just think naturally the late third was a perfect spot for the double dip of a receiver. Now, I like the Dwayne Carter pick. The Bills probably thought he wouldn't be there much longer, and they did have, in their opinion, a gaping hole at the 3 tech. Beside Ed Oliver and now Dwayne Carter, they're set at 3 tech. As long as Carter develops, they're set at 3 tech for the years to come. So they feel fairly good at, now having multiple players at the defensive tackle position under contract but then you have the 1 tech position with, obviously, when you look at that, you have Daquan Jones and Austin Johnson. Both are older. The Bills are still going to need to do something at 1 tech at their other defensive tackle position going forward. So the Bills definitely felt like they needed to have the 3 tech position settled for the near future. I disagreed a little bit. I thought that there was potentially other defensive tackle prospects, but I really liked Carter, so I was cool with the pick. But I wanted to double dip. Kevin, that leads me to my main point, though. I really think that there's a plan at this receiver position, and it wasn't Cephas and it's not Claypool. Both of them will make a try at the Justin Shorter 5th, 6th receiver spot. There's going to be a fairly decent battle there. That's fine with me. I have no problems with that. I just think that there's going to be another acquisition. The $10 million coming off the board in 3 weeks. It's going to be tough for me to not sit here in our show in maybe in exactly 4 weeks and discussing what we may be doing in the offseason, it's going to be tough for me to not think they're going to spend that 10 on receiver. I personally believed there's smoke where there's smoke, there's fire when it came to Deebo Samuel. They drafted the bigger guys. They were looking for bigger receivers here with Cephas and with Claypool and with Keon Coleman. It just leads me to think that they may be interested in a speedier, faster type of versatile receiver. And I'm just going to have to see how this plays out. But I just think that there's something there still for the Bills that they're going to want to come in with one more final addition to this roster.
Okay. I mean, I could see that because I don't feel like the room is set myself. Like if I were Brandon Beane, I would be trying to add one more because the way I see it, Keon Coleman is an upgraded version of Gabe Davis. And then you have Khalil Shakir as a 3. Personally, I think of Curtis Samuel as a 4. I know he can be better than a wide receiver 4, but based on how I think they're going to use him, I would have him as that gadget type, first man off the bench, can play boundary, can play slot. He's wide receiver 4. Then you have Justin Shorter, Matt Collins, Chase Claypool, KJ Hamler, Andy Isabella for those 5th and 6th spots. So I think that there's a gaping hole at wide receiver 1, unless that wide receiver 1 is actually Dalton Kincaid. Because I've been hearing people talk about that and saying maybe this offense is going to revolve around Dalton Kincaid, and then you just have supplementary pieces around him. So I guess before we get into the inner workings here of how we think this offense is going to function, do you want to talk about some potential names that the Bills could go after? Because I don't think anyone had Chase Claypool on their bingo card. So, I mean, do you think that there's a free agent out there? I know Tyler Boyd was one of your guys. He signed with, he reunited with Brian Callahan in Tennessee the other day. So he's off the board. OBJ is down in Miami. I mean, is there someone still in free agency that the Bills could go after? Or do you think that there could be a trade? And last thing I'll say real quick is Beane said, don't expect a big trade. Like, we don't have that much money. I know we're getting 10 million, but we got to use that on our rookies. So are you still buying into there could be a big trade?
I don't buy that because the rookies are already accounted for. He's going to sign them before that money. Also, to my calculations, is only going to cost $2.5 million to have it. So, I mean, he's going to justify a trade came available. The value was right. I mean, he's going to say anything he needs to say in the summer if and when that happens. They ate some of the money, whatever the scenario will be, he'll make good on that. Maybe he necessarily was leaning toward, don't think there's going to be a big trade today or during the draft or with the product. The Bills have multiple draft choices next year. They have an additional 2nd. They have an additional 4. They have another 4 coming with a compensation pick. They have an additional 6 from Boogie Basham finally, from the Boogie Basham trade. They have picks all across each variables and each skill set. So no, I do not buy that. I generally take Brandon Beane at his word, and I think he's going to say, well, San Francisco ate some money. Here's the kicker. San Francisco double dipped at receiver while having Brandon Ayuk, while having Deebo Samuel. Doesn't make a lot of sense. They're not drafting backup players. They're drafting replacement level players, especially taking Ricky Pearsall in the 1st round. We had him in one of our mocks, Kevin. I had to come up to get him. Was it the 2nd or 3rd we traded up to get him in one of our mock drafts? I mean, they took him in the 1st round. They have plans for Ricky Pearsall, as well as when it comes to Brandon Cowing as well. So I just don't necessarily buy that they're just doing it in case. I think there's smoke there that they trade 1 or 2 of those guys in San Francisco. So to me, the money's coming off. The Bills aren't just going to stare at it. They don't need it for their rookies. That's not true. So that one I know is not true. Just because by trading down, there isn't a lot of cap space they need from the draft class. Sure, there's a cash that gets paid out to those guys, but when it comes to cap space, it's already being accounted for with guys like Chase Claypool or guys like Hand, Williams, just other guys that are just on the back end of the roster. It's that cap space is already being accounted for when you look at like Nicholas Morrow or Balin Spector, Kingsley Jonathan. Those guys are already placeholders on the roster. So they would just be swapped out with a rookie for the cap purposes. So Kevin, I think a trade's coming. I'm going to think that until September 1st.
Okay, interesting. So let me read a list of these free agent wide receivers, as long as they're up to date, which I believe Spot Track is up to date. Tell me if any of these stick out. And obviously, this is welcome to anyone in the comments as well. Hunter Renfrow, Allen Robinson, Michael Thomas, Russell Gage, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Zay Jones, Jamal Agnew, Mecole Hardman, Jakeem Grant, Randall Cobb, Marquise Goodwin, DeAndre Carter, Sterling Shepard. And then it's just a bunch of guys like Richie James, Laquan Treadwell, Alex Erickson, Byron Pringle. That's
No.
pretty much it. So, I mean, there are some names, but I don't know. Like Hunter Renfrow seems too redundant based on what we have on this roster. Michael Thomas seems like he's redundant now with Keon Coleman. Same with Allen Robinson. I mean, do you want a field stretcher with MVS? He has drop problems. I mean, you just got rid of that with Gabe Davis. Zay Jones, do you want a Zay Jones reunion? I think he was visiting with, who did I see today? The Chargers? Or was that another team?
He started with Tennessee, but Tennessee signed Boyd, so I'm assuming he's not going to go there. So he's kind of making his rounds on who he may sign with. Zay Jones would be a kind of receiver I could see that could make sense around. I mean, I think that 49ers were interested in him. So that's another tell. Like, what are they doing with their receiver position? So ultimately, Zay Jones would be interesting to me, but none of those names really. Like MVS probably is a similar guy. What they'd be interested in. Mecole Hardman makes sense for what they're doing, but not a lot there is really gonna move anything to me. I've liked Terrace Marshall trading with Carolina for a while now with the Joe Brady connection, so that may only cost a fifth or a sixth. So that is another option if they're going the low end move that could fit Brandon Beane's narrative. But so could like someone like Cortland Sutton when they only trade a fifth for him as well. So like no one said it's going to be Justin Jefferson. It definitely could be like a tier below that.
I'm going to throw another name out there just because, I thought about this because during our draft coverage, I was like, what if I just had like the hottest take right now? And I was like, what if I say the Bills trade one of their picks for Trayon Burks? I'm like, no, that doesn't even make sense. Like, why would you do that? But now, after the Titans signed Tyler Boyd, I mean, they have a nice core of wide receivers between Boyd, DeAndre Hopkins, and Calvin Ridley. And it kind of seems like there's not really a spot for Trayon Burks. And that would be a very cheap contract. Would you sign up for maybe shedding a day 3 pick for Trayon Burks?
I am not a Burks fan at all. I didn't like his film in college. I don't like what he's done to produce. I'm always okay with giving a flyer on a guy in the 6th round, similar to Marshall from the Panthers. So sure, in that regards, like I definitely would take some talent influx, but I'm not very large on him. I didn't like him. I didn't like him before the draft that year. I didn't like him his rookie year, and I don't like him now. So not overly, but sure, anyone with Josh Allen may be a matchup. Maybe a matchup, but I don't really like his film. Didn't like it at the time. So no, that wouldn't be my top choice. But coming in like on a low budget deal, they're gonna have to eat some of the money because they've already paid him. So ultimately, like, would I be mad? No, if that's the move, I would be more mad that would be the move that they were thinking of. But I think I'm still gonna go back to the 49ers till it's not realistic. With them trying to work out a deal with Ayuk per Rappaport today, I just think that Deebo Samuel's as good as gone.
So you think Deebo Samuel is the one who could get moved and maybe to the Bills? Because there was that report that the Bills and Patriots were looking into it over the draft. I believe that was Thursday night into Friday. So do you believe that smoke is actually true and that the Bills could get Deebo Samuel?
I do. I do believe that smoke is real. I obviously don't know that anything's going to come to fruition, but I buy into that smoke. I don't think it's random. And Beane's response to that always isn't like, no, we're not looking. It's always like, oh, well, I'm always going to be linked to somebody. Well, that's not really shooting anything down. Well, are you actually linked or not? I think there's smoke around Deebo Samuel and maybe other receivers, maybe Tyler Lockett. That would be a really nice addition, like a style of veteran player that the Bills could want. They have DK Metcalf and Jackson Smith and Jigba coming through the ranks. They like the Eskridge a little bit. So they certainly could move on from Tyler Lockett. But I mean, Deebo Samuel is just the perfect
someone too. Not to cut you off, but didn't Seattle take another receiver?
They didn't. No.
I thought there was one on like Friday or Saturday.
No, they didn't, because I was paying attention to Seattle because of that reason. But they're the team that did sign Chenault. They did take Jackson Smith and Jigba in the first of the year last year. They took Eskridge in the year prior, or 2 years prior. Ultimately, they're pretty talented there. They've obviously had a new turnover to Mike McDonald. Obviously, could they go with Sam Howell, Geno Smith? I don't know. But I don't. I mean, they already have Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet. So I'm not sure what they're going to do ultimately. But he's just a name that could make a lot of sense for the Bills. I'm not even saying he's available, but Deebo Samuel is the kind of player I think that the Bills would claim their offense is missing. There's been a lot of rumors or things about like he needs to stay healthy. He missed 2 games last year, a couple of games the year prior, and only 1 game in 2001. So realistically, like he's missed 3 or 4 games over the last 3 years. So I don't like. I think it like looks like he's always hurt, or you feel like he always is hurt, but on the field he's there. I think he goes out in the game often, like for a play, because I watch the 49ers, and he always jumps off the field. Kind of reminds me of Trey White in that regards. But also, I just think with that running versatility, 1,000 career rushing yards. Did you know he has 1,000 career rushing yards and 19 touchdowns on the ground?
I did not.
That's insane. It's like insanity. Like it kind of reminds me of like Josh Allen on the ground in terms of like, I just think that he could be the fit to what the Bills are looking for. And the difference with Deebo Samuel's contract compared to like Justin Jefferson's or Brandon Ayuk's, you can stick the 49ers with some of it because of the way it's signed. On a guy on a 5th-year option, you can't give that. There's nothing you can do with that. But when it comes to Deebo Samuel, he's going to be in a range to where he's got a couple years left on his deal. You can move that money around. You can make them eat some of it. There's a lot of things you can do. That to me sticks out to what the Bills may be looking for when it comes to a compliment to Keon Coleman, to a compliment to Justin Shorter, Matt Collins, and Chase Claypool. It does seem to speak to me to a boundary versatile move receiver like Deebo Samuel.
I haven't looked into his contract yet, but while we were talking, I was thinking Tyler Lockett would be perfect. Just that veteran field stretcher. I think that would be the perfect compliment because really you could say that the Bills already have a Samuel. I mean, literally they do with Curtis Samuel, but he plays just like Deebo. So do you need another one with the same skill set? Because I think the Bills want to diversify their offense as much as possible. That's why they've been getting all these big receivers. So is Deebo Samuel too redundant to Curtis Samuel? And, you could say, well, the more speed, the better, and the more separation, the better. Sure. Yeah, I get that. But maybe if you have Curtis Samuel to work the underneath routes, you have Lockett to go deep. That could be a spicy combination right there.
Yeah, Lockett's on it. I mean, he's got 2 years, $30 million left, and the Bills would have to want to take that on. I'm not even sure that he would be available. I mean, and he's also turning 32. So there's definitely still some challenges with that for the 2 year, $30 million remaining contract here for him. I don't know how realistic that is to me. But I personally like him a lot, and I think that could make a lot of sense for the Bills. I just kind of read in between the lines and what the Bills may be looking at doing, and going that route with the versatility. I mean, sure. I mean, I guess you could call Curtis Samuel Deebo light. For instance, 700 yards rushing and 7 touchdowns. So obviously he has about half the production on the ground alone than someone like Deebo Samuel does. And I mean, I just think Deebo is a better all around player. But the Bills are looking for that roster versatility when it comes to these players. That's what we talked about all offseason was maybe it doesn't mean they may not have the same type of players on the roster.
I'm going to throw one more name at you. Now, this guy hasn't been talked about a lot, but I wonder if he could become available. Chris Godwin. Now, I think he would also be perfect for this offense because this is a team with Tampa Bay who did re-sign Mike Evans, so he's clearly their wide receiver one. They have Trey Palmer, who they drafted last year, and now they just drafted Jalen McMillan in the 3rd round this year. So after that, I mean, they're kind of far and few between. Ryan Miller, Cephas Johnson, Raheem Jarrett. So, I mean, they don't have much depth. So I don't know if Godwin would be available, but I wonder if Tampa would say, you know what? He is getting up there in age. We don't feel like paying him anymore. Sure, give us a day 2. Well, no, probably would be a day 3. If you get a 2 for Diggs, I think Godwin would probably be a 4, right?
Yeah. Yeah, probably. He's interesting because he's on a 1-year deal. That obviously they'd have to eat a little bit remaining of that contract. So he'd be on a 1-year, $20 million deal. Obviously they'd have to do something with that. They would have to actually stick Tampa with some of that, or they'd have to figure out a new arrangement for him. But he does match. You're right. Yet another player that matches up that he's been talked about very much so in the boundary now. They don't want his slot production. Tampa Bay just had said most recently. I saw that being talked about for him. So there's definitely he's definitely a player only owed 20 million left remaining. That's it. Would be non-guaranteed. The Bills could definitely do something with them. I think it's like less about needing a certain type of player, more just adding to the room. I don't care. You could call Deebo Samuel number two. You could call Keon Coleman the number two. You could call Khalil Shakir the number two. It doesn't really matter who I think is one, two, three, four, five. I think it just matters that they have a varying skill sets and have multiple players on the roster at any given time. Because look, like the Bills ran into major injuries at the linebacker position last year. Cornerback into the playoffs. Rizal Douglas was playing hurt. Trey White was already out. Christian Benford. Like they ran into issues at linebacker and corner last year. If that hits receiver, it gets thin quickly where you're playing Matt Collins, you're playing Chase Claypool, you're playing KJ Hamler, whoever it may be, a ton of snaps. So I do think they need to make one more influx, not only for depth, not only for versatility, but an overall unit score that I think would actually upgrade the Bills roster. If they make this move, Kevin, here's my opinion, and we'll get into philosophy next. I think the Bills' overall offense is better this year if they can find out a way to add one more receiver to the mixture.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's the one piece that's missing that's holding me back from saying this is a Super Bowl contender. Right now, I feel like this is a team that's going to get to the playoffs. I think they'll still win the division. I mean, we'll see when the schedule comes out next week. But I think they're going to do what they normally do. Win the division, win the first playoff game, and then crap the bed in the divisional round. So if you get a Chris Godwin or a Tyler Lockett, then I'm like, okay, we're back. AFC Championship, Super Bowl. But right now, I don't want to say that this year is just a scratch, because I think anytime you have Josh Allen, you will be amazed at what can happen. But we saw what happened last year when he was throwing to guys like Trent Sherfield and Deontay Hardy in the playoffs. And this receiver room is pretty lackluster right now, to say the least. I mean, I know that they have a plan, and we're going to get into that plan. So we'll try to, break it down and put a more positive spin on it. But I just don't feel like this is a Super Bowl contender. And like Brandon Beane said, the season doesn't start till September. So there's got to be something else, right?
And one thing to remember, we're going to talk about this next week. Week 9 is now the NFL trade deadline. We're going to be talking a lot about what game that is. It's like November 5th now. It was moved back like at least 5, 6, 7 days, whatever it was, 5 days, 6 days. It's going to be another day to watch for the schedule, because if they do start week 9, let's say there's no bye in there. I'm not sure when their bye is going to be yet. We'll talk about that later. 6-2. You may be making more. You maybe checking back in on Deebo Samuel or something, or Tyler Lockett, or somebody else that may be available at that time. So that truly will be the final day where I'm like, man, they really didn't do anything else at the receiver position on November 5th. But until that day, 5 months from now, exactly almost, I'm going to be considering that they're going to make one final move at the receiver position. Because look, let's get into the offense now. So if you look at the offense and what they're trying to do philosophically and what they could potentially be doing on an offensive grand scale, you have Ray Davis. We're going to just start with the rookies. Keon Coleman over Gabe Davis. You have Ray Davis over Latavius Murray, Damian Harris, Leonard Fournette, a bunch of players that were hurt last year. You have another year with the 2 tight ends and the 12 personnel that will be playing more this season and more together. You have an offensive line that got a lot younger. You added 3 rookies in there. We'll see if they make the team. You're already rolling with like Alec Anderson, Ryan Vandemark, some younger players on the roster there in the first place. So you got fairly young, but can Van Pran push Connor McGovern to left guard? Can he push David Edwards out of the lineup? We'll see how that looks. Will David Edwards earn the starting role? So the offensive line is fairly young, and I'm very, very hopeful for that. Khalil Shakir takes another step. I mean, the offense in totality, could be better. And then we're going to get into some of the philosophies that we think have changed. But adding that final receiver, honestly, defense aside, we'll get into that in a different day. It just looks like the Bills are more talented.
Yeah, and again, wide receiver is the one position that's holding me back from saying this team got younger and better. Now, before we get into, I know we keep hinting at this, but I got to ask you this: what were your thoughts on the Chase Claypool signing? Because I'll just say I think it's low risk, high reward. So I don't think that people need to flip out, because if he is that quote unquote cancer, and if he can't turn his career around, the Bills will just cut him. Like, this wasn't a wide receiver one replacement. They weren't saying, "Hey, Chase Claypool, can you come play wide receiver one? Can you be the alpha to replace Stephon Diggs?" I mean, this is literally just, we're going to take a flyer on a guy who's had some down times in his career, and we're going to let him battle it out in the summer. And if he proves that he can still, be worthy of that second round selection in 2020, then cool. You'll have a roster spot. But if not, see you later, man.
Yeah, I think really Chase Claypool is a guy I personally like taking a chance on. He was starting to become toward that. You just read the list earlier in the show. He was starting to become toward the top of the list of guys that might make sense for a flyer. Do you like him? Do you like MVS? Do you like Mecole Hardman? At some point, a couple, especially after Boyd was gone, OBJ was gone, Michael Gallup was gone. Some of those guys were signing at the top of the list there. It did make sense for him to play. And then you look through his quarterbacks that he's played with outside of rookie year with Ben Roethlisberger, and then the ghost of Ben Roethlisberger the final year, and then a couple of bad Steelers quarterbacks into something with the Bears, into getting mixed in with that motion offense in Miami, in week 7. Everyone's like, well, you still had Tua was in there. He was in the Mike McDaniel offense. And I was like, yeah, he came in week 7 in a motion offense, played 50 snaps. It's all that they were given to him. Ultimately, I'm not overly concerned by that stretch. I think there's a lot of untapped potential that he's going to be playing with the best receiver that he's had, or excuse me, the best quarterback that he's had in his career, especially at the end of his career, Ben Roethlisberger, into whatever was going on with their backups and into Chicago. So I'm pretty excited to see what he can do. I think that he might edge out. I think he's got an outside chance to edge out Justin Shorter, to edge out KJ Hamler. Look, the funny part to me is the KJ Hamler stuff. Everyone's like, oh, he was misused. He was hurt. He never was given a draw. The same things you could say about Chase Claypool. Chase Claypool was just traded for the pick we took Keon Coleman, the 33rd overall pick last year, not 50 years ago, last year. So that's the pick we took Keon Coleman. That's a pretty important pick. He's talented. He's very 9.8 RAS. We talk about RAS all the time. We had Kent Lee Platt on the show a few weeks ago. But a 9.8 RAS, big body, burner. Everyone's like, he's got no speed. I'm like, I don't know what Chase Claypool you've watched, but he definitely still possesses speed, and he's still young. I like Hamler. I think he's intriguing too, but ultimately he's not any more intriguing. He hasn't shown the ability to do what Chase Claypool could do, just in my opinion, neither has Justin Shorter or any of those guys, Shavers, any of those guys at that spot on the roster. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do. And if he has a good camp and he connects with Josh Allen, he's going to make the roster as the team's 5th receiver.
Do you know that Chase Claypool has more career receptions than Gabe Davis in less games?
Yeah, I've seen those graphics. I've seen some stuff about that, yeah.
I heard Chris Brown talking about it on One Bills Live, and I didn't hear the full quote, so I just pulled up their stats, and I was like, man, what are these stats here? Because I know it's pretty close. So Chase Claypool has played in 58 career games, and he has 175 career receptions. Gabe Davis, 64 games, 163 receptions. So I'm not trying to say that Chase Claypool is going to be the new Gabe Davis, because I think that's what Keon Coleman is. And that remains to be seen. Maybe Coleman plays a little bit of the Diggs and Davis role. And who knows, maybe Claypool does turn into the new Gabe Davis. But for what it's worth, Claypool does have more career receptions than Gabe, although Gabe does have more yards and touchdowns. But I thought that was definitely interesting.
It is interesting. And everyone's like, Keon Coleman's the new Gabe Davis replacement. Maybe they're looking more at Matt Collins. Maybe they're looking more at Chase Claypool, KJ Hamler, maybe some version of Quintez Cephas. Maybe they're trying to find the Gabe Davis replacement and have other plans for Curtis Samuel and Keon Coleman. So ultimately, you're right. I think maybe they found something there. in regards to Chase Claypool and they got him on a minimum deal, so there's nothing we need to worry about there contractually. Ultimately, I think it's a pretty good fit. And I mean, you're going to roster Matt Collins. He plays all the special teams receiver already, so it's not like you need a special teams receiver. Justin Shorter may make the roster at the special teams receiver spot, maybe keeping 6. But as long as they haven't made the move we've talked about, going out and getting another receiver, Claypool has a chance, has a pretty good path to the roster, even if Matt Collins will make the roster, and even if Justin Shorter has a nice camp, they could keep 6 because 2 of them, really, Shorter is going to play teams and Hollins is going to play teams. Chase Claypool could really quickly find himself getting more receiver 4 snaps when it comes to the offense. So maybe that's time to talk about the philosophical changes on the offense to the bigger bodied, speedier, razzy receivers. But I think that when it comes to the offense, I think you can say Chase Claypool has a legitimate chance if he's able to come in and show that he can learn this offense with Josh Allen.
Well, the last thing I'll say about Chase Claypool is he did not move the needle for me. This wasn't a signing where I said, yes, we are set now.
Sure.
The Super Bowl is back on now that the Bills have Chase Claypool. But it did make me realize something. And I thought this is very interesting. So I saw that the Bills signed Chase Claypool, and I'm like, he's pretty big, right? And I looked it up, 6'4", 238. And I was like, that's weird. I feel like we've seen that size before. Maybe not the 238 pounds, but at least a 6'4". So then I looked into it, and here's what I tweeted. I said, I know the Bills signed Curtis Samuel, but there seems to be a type of receiver that they've gone after so far this offseason. So they first signed Matt Collins, who's listed. Now, these are all on the Bills website. So the Bills have him listed at 6'4", 221 pounds. Then they drafted Keon Coleman, 6'4", 215 pounds. And then they signed Chase Claypool, 6'4", 238 pounds. And they still have Justin Shorter, who is 6'4", 223 pounds. So then I was thinking, you know what? We talked about this a little bit last week when Izzy and Anthony were on the show. And now I really want to talk about it because right now, considering that the Bills haven't gone after that Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Tyler Lockett, fill in the blank. Based on this roster right now, I think that this is a Bills, specifically Joe Brady, saying, you know what? I want to continue to do what I did at the end of last year and what we did well. And that's how we were able to rip off 5 straight wins. We won that first playoff game, and we were finishing on a high note. I know the season didn't end on a high note, but the way they played from November to December into January, and that was where they went on these long sustaining drives. They got James Cook more involved. The offensive line was paving the way, and they started to use some of their players to their advantage. Someone like Ty Johnson could be a perfect example for this, where he had a specific role on this team. And I'm looking at all these wide receivers and their sizes. And one of the things about Keon Coleman that stood out from his draft profile was that all the scouts raved about his physicality and how not only can he make the tough contested catch and he's a big body receiver, but he is a willing run blocker and he does it well. And I was like, well, wait a sec. If you got Matt Collins, who is also described as a run blocker, he can play special teams. Now you have Chase Claypool. And then it clicked. I was like, I think this is Joe Brady saying, I want to continue to do what we did and maybe not be a first team, because I think if you have Josh Allen as your quarterback, you still want to utilize his arm, his cannon to your advantage. But I think that we are seeing a philosophical shift from where the last couple of years, Ken Dorsey just wanted to throw it all over teams. And it was literally just vertical deep shots. Allen to Diggs, Allen to Diggs. Now I think Joe Brady is trying to shift this, maybe with McDermott's tutelage, and saying, you know what? Let's go on these longer drives. Let's get the run game going. That's why they drafted Ray Davis, maybe to complement James Cook. They want that big bruising back. They re-signed Ty Johnson. They're going to go 12 personnel again with the 2 tight ends. They re-signed Quentin Morris. So until I see a big wide receiver trade, I think this is what we're looking at for the 2024 Bills offense.
Yeah, and I mean, one more final name that you could have added to the graphics was Shavers as well, an undrafted free agent that has now been talked about as potentially another guy that could compete here with them, that has a chance, and mainly because maybe he fits that mold. But yes, they're looking for the 12 sets, the 12 personnel sets. When you're rolling out with Knox and Kincaid, the offense was better. Like, you say what you want about Knox, the offense was better with them both on the field. Like, they passed better out of 12 personnel. They actually run better out of 11, but they pass better out of 12. And it's been very successful for him. Hence why, you didn't see as much production for Davis and Diggs down the stretch. Khalil Shakir was getting open. They were utilizing 12. They were running the ball. They were in a pretty good situation. So to me, you have two good tight ends. Like, look, their tight end room is tops of the NFL. It's like close to the top of the NFL. Like the combination is really good. Knox still hasn't gotten paid that much money from that extension. He keeps taking cuts. He keeps pushing out money. He hasn't really made a ton. So it's not like he's been overpaid yet. Finally, next year, maybe the year, if he doesn't take another cut. But ultimately, at this stage, Knox and Kincaid are very much so a very reasonable duo that can do everything. And Kincaid played a lot in line last year. He played 250 snaps in line. That's way more than I thought he would play in his rookie year. So he's playing tight end. He's very much so still developing in the blocking, and he showed way more from the blocking front than I ever thought he would. So between the two now you got Khalil Shakir, you got the versatility of Samuel. You're going to run 12. You're going to run a lot of blocking schemes in there. You're going to use Hollins in some of those situations, Coleman at times. What can Claypool do? But they're looking for those bigger receivers that can get open in one-on-one coverage, that can burn down the field, or can make, as Brandon Bean likes to say, dogs that have rack. Because there's going to be a lot of situations when they're in 12, and they're just going to be covered by a corner too. And the Bills can make headway that way, especially if you start to now line up, split from 12 personnel and you line up Kincaid in the slot. You're going to create a matchup nightmare to where you can't cover Kincaid, Shakir, Coleman with the personnel package that you may have on the field. So that's what the philosophical change is. You saw Brady very successful at it, even through the KC game, really struggled a little bit in the fourth quarter of the KC game. But before that, they were cooking on offense. And I don't use that term often. I don't like that term a lot. But they were a really good Chiefs defense. They were in good shape, scoring in the 20s on them early-ish on in that game in the third quarter, early in the third. So they were doing everything right in the first playoff game. They played really well down the stretch. But cooking, I think a biggest addition to this offense with Keon Coleman, obviously, and Curtis Samuel is going to be Ray Davis. I think his ability to catch out of the backfield, 7 touchdowns. He's one of the best receiving backs in college football with turning them into touchdowns. He's just got that quick step, that stutter action you're looking for. He just reminds me of a productive player, a guy that's going to be beneficial in an offense. And I think the Bills really upgraded the juice from that running back room. And I think he's going to be more of a competitive player than we think. So I think, someone that I'm looking for in this whole thing is Ray Davis and how he's going to add to this offense. And I think that he's going to be a really nice piece of after his biggest comp, Kevin, let's put it into comparisons purposes. DeAndre Swift is who he almost directly compares to out of his height, weight, speed.
Well, that's a good comp. Now, here's what I'll say about this, because again, I think this is what the Bills are doing. Now, even if they do go acquire another big name wide receiver and it's that speedy or shifty guy, I think this is still their plan of attack. Because think about it this way. If you get this offense cooking, like you said, now I think it's careful with how we say this, because I don't want to say that the Bills are going to become a run first team. But now, for what it's worth, when Joe Brady took over down the stretch, they were like the 5th most run heaviest team in the league, right?
Yeah, correct.
So, they did run the ball a lot, but look at it this way. If you do get that run game going and James Cook is just slicing his way through the hole, Ray Davis is barreling his way through and plowing his way up there, you're going to get the linebackers and the defensive backs to suck in and say, wow, this guy is really a threat. Actually, all of their running backs are a threat. We need to come up and play them. And even if they don't hand the ball off, they have guys like KJ Hamler and Curtis Samuel who they could just dump it off to underneath, and they could use their speed and shiftiness to take it to the house. So you get the linebackers and some of the defensive backs to want to come up, and that's when you use Josh Allen's arm to your advantage, and that's when you can slice up the defense and he can really air it out, because you get those defensive backs and the linebackers to suck in. That's when you take the top off. And I think it was the opposite with Ken Dorsey, where he wanted to take the top off, but they were just sitting back because they knew what Ken Dorsey wanted to do. So that's why I like Joe Brady, because he's more well balanced. And he says, look, I think that the proper way to run the offense is, yeah, we're going to pass the ball a lot because we have Josh Allen, but we have to be able to run situationally. We have to be able to run at certain times. And then once you get the defense to really keep an eye on your running backs, that's when you throw it up the seam to Kincaid. That's when you go to Coleman, and that'll make the separation issues look better, because Keon Coleman is going to find himself wide open because the defense is trying to stop James Cook.
And I think, once again, like the ability to run and pass out of 12, to earlier points that I've seen here, to be able to pass out of 12 has been successful for them as well. So the ability to do that has been wildly successful. And here we go. I just wanted to bring up his spider chart. And as we see, it's a direct 95.8% comparison. You see this almost the same exact spider chart from DeAndre Swift, from Ray Davis. Will he be on third down? Yes. Will he be catching touchdowns? I believe so. It's going to be a nice addition to this offense. The Bills handpicked, to the philosophical changes. They handpicked the running back, and I think that's why you see the Bills in embedded yesterday basically saying that Ray Davis is the pick in the fourth round. They were after a running back in that round. A little bit of a run happened right before the Bills selected in the fourth round of the draft, to where they were thinking that they needed to make that move at that point, and even willing to risk Van Pran Granger. But it's really interesting to say Granger will be our next pick. It's funny that he lasted that long. Like, I don't know how the Bills do that. That they could take Ray Davis at 128, and then at 141. I mean, it wasn't that long into the fifth round, but still, 13 picks later, they felt good enough that Van Pran Granger would be there. And the Bills obviously selected Ray Davis over favorites Braylon Allen and Audric Estime, two names we talked about here on this show, two names that many thought would be the picks at that specific spot. I thought it was fairly obvious he may go there. Even Isaiah Davis went a little bit later into the fifth round. So, we thought, Kamani Vidal, another guy I liked, early into the sixth. So we had 4 or 5 names there that were kind of more at the top of my board. I didn't know that once again, I didn't think Ray Davis would be there, like Van Pran Granger would be there in late into the fourth, and the Bills not having a third during the pre-draft process. I just didn't believe that would be the case. That him and Jalen Wright would be iffy if they'd be there. And Jalen Wright was a name that went off to the Miami Dolphins at pick 120. We will never know if he was the one he was the only other name the Bills could have liked more than Ray Davis. They did a lot of work with him. But other than that, I mean, the Bills felt like they were in pretty good position at that stage to select what they deemed to be, obviously could have been Jonathan Brooks or Trey Benson, but two guys that went in the top 70 picks. Obviously Blake Corum was there as well, Marshawn Lloyd, a couple names, but no one besides that, no one went off the board until Jalen Wright. So we will never know if Jalen Wright would have been the pick. But the Bills did obviously pick him over Guriendo, too, a nice-looking candidate there in the combine, who had a really good combine. But was it Jalen Wright that may have been the name? But I do think with the name starting to go, Bucky Irving and Will Shipley going off the board, the Bills definitely felt like at that spot he was their running back, and it was good to see them be able to select him over Guriendo, Braylon Allen, Audric Estime. So I feel pretty comfortable that he was the guy toward the top of their targets list, and they have a plan for him. And he's going to get a ton of carries.
Yeah, and a couple of reasons why I think that the Bills are undergoing this philosophical change is, I kind of talked about a little bit with the Ken Dorsey versus Joe Brady comparison here, but I think it's more of an NFL full scale comparison, because I think a lot of defenses are starting to play back, right? Because once you got these big rocket arms and Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Burrow, Herbert, anyone pretty much, they've been playing too high cover shell. So now I think that we're starting to see a shift where teams are going to say, okay, you're going to play back on us because we have a rocket arm for a quarterback. Okay, we're just going to build up our running game, and we're going to get you guys to suck in, and you're going to have to defend our running game. And as soon as you guys come in, bam, that's when we're going to take the top off. So I think we might see this philosophical change in the whole league, where teams are starting to pick up on it. So maybe Buffalo's ahead of the curve here. Would you agree with that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think I absolutely believe that to be true. And I'm still interested to see what the Bills would have done with that third round pick. I mean, I don't know how realistic it would have been, but had McMillan, who went to Tampa, you mentioned him earlier, or Roman Wilson, we haven't mentioned, going to Pittsburgh, they were falling a little bit, like late into the third. Had they been there for those picks, those would have been the two that really. I don't know if those would have, like, Burton also went in round 3, as well as earlier in the round. You had Malachi Corley go. I don't think that was realistic for him to be there. He was always like a second round draft choice. But Roman Wilson, as he started to fall a little bit into pick 84, and McMillan falling to 92, with the Bills, have added to that philosophical difference. But ultimately, they felt like they had it there. Josh Allen said, Keon Coleman was his guy from the start, and that bigger body. But yes, I do agree to your original point, that is how they're looking, that they want to play, because if they're in 12 and they throw very well out of 12, they want guys that can get rack and that can take the top off of a defense in a one-on-one situation. Because quite frankly, let's even use Claypool. Like, he's not going to be double covered. There's going to be situations to where he's probably on the defense's worst corner. And if he can win that matchup, you already have to worry about Shakir. You have to worry about Coleman maybe on the other side, and you have to worry about Kincaid and Knox also in 12 personnel. Depending on who's on the field at the time, like especially if they trot out Chase Claypool, you never know. It could work out, and that I do believe is maybe their philosophical change as we head into 2024.
And another reason why they might want to do this is because I don't know if I buy into this, but it's definitely a valid point that it keeps the defense off the field longer. Because look what happened to the Bills' defense last year, decimated with injuries. And the longer they're out there, the more susceptible they are to getting injured. Now, I know the Bills got younger. They got rid of a lot of those older guys and bigger contracts, heightened by Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. So I think Cole Bishop and Mike Edwards and the new defensive backfield is definitely going to be better in that aspect. But the Bills might look at this and say, regardless of the ages of these players, we don't want to risk them getting hurt. And I know you could say that offensive players could get hurt, because I think last year was an anomaly with how almost perfect the offense was with not getting injured. And then the defense just got decimated week after week. So the Bills might look at that and say, okay, you know what? We're going to go on these long sustaining drives, try to keep our defense as healthy as possible. And we think that being a well-balanced offense is going to be the best recipe for success. And maybe this is what McDermott meant all these years when he said complementary football, where again, this doesn't mean that they're going to be a run-first team. It's just running in the right situations in order to throw the defense off enough to be able to use that to your advantage on the passing attack.
Yeah, for sure. And I got to always change with the times. And he's always referenced making adapting and changing. And I think they've made a philosophical difference on the O-line. They're spending assets. They're getting younger. Cedric Van Pran Granger, like we've already talked about earlier in the show, with their philosophical kind of differences here. You had Aaron Cromer in the draft room, and the Bills basically saying, here you go. Like, you get 3 moldable players in Grable, Van Pran Granger, and Clayton. What the Bills are going to get a roster exemption for him. They're obviously hoping to take the 7th round Philly approach, where they've developed a good looking starting left tackle from this program in the 7th round in 2018, Jordan Mailata. So the Bills are hoping that they can maybe do the same behind Spencer Brown. But yeah, just the youth of it with Osiris Torrance. David Edwards is pretty young himself. Connor McGovern's not that old. Spencer Brown is still in his first rookie contract. La'el Collins may be the only, and obviously Deion Dawkins. But beside that, you're going to roster Vandemark, Alec Anderson, Van Pran Granger, some form of final roster spot. Obviously going to La'el Collins, but they could roster Keaton Bills, an undrafted free agent, Grable, Travis Clayton. You're going to have a very young Bills offensive line, which is going to be nice. And now the receiving core is getting younger, obviously with Curtis Samuel being the oldest guy, but Keon Coleman and Khalil Shakir and Justin Shorter is fairly young unit as well. So, and then Dalton Kincaid leading that, and James Cook still on his rookie deal, and Ray Davis. It's a young offense, Kevin. Isn't that at least all on rookie deals? Isn't that kind of exciting for once?
Yeah, and I'm wondering if they're doing this with the intent of saying Joe Brady is our offensive coordinator. Now, obviously, he got interviewed by the Atlanta Falcons during the playoffs last year. I hate that rule, but that's a conversation for a different day. So, I mean, if they have a successful year, Joe Brady might be taking jobs elsewhere after this season. But
Yep.
I think this is a Bill saying Joe Brady is our offensive coordinator right now, and we're trying to build our offense based on what suits his play calling best. So maybe that's
Right.
why they didn't trade up for Brian Thomas. As much as I wanted Brian Thomas, maybe Joe Brady didn't. And maybe if Ken Dorsey was here, maybe they would have traded up for Brian Thomas because maybe Dorsey would have played a role in saying, hey, Bean, this guy fits my play calling to the best of my abilities. So I think there are a lot of different avenues where, we're sitting there on draft night and we're saying, why did you trade out of the first round? Why did you trade with Kansas City? Why didn't you take Worthy? Why didn't you take Lockett? And then they say the cliche, well, he was on our board for a reason. We like the value. They looked into all the essentials. And I think that's some of the stuff that we're not privy to is how does he actually fit into the offense? What did he say during his interviews? How does he test? What are his mentals like? How much is he willing to learn? And how much, which is, I think, one of the biggest factors, how well will he relate to Joe Brady?
Also, I think it can be said what the Bills are building from a roster perspective of long term. Like they're looking at this from we're in another style of window that we've talked about. Like, let's try to get ahead of the curve and running the offense that we want to run philosophically. So I think that that is going to be an advantage for the Bills to be able to now, all these faster teams are getting speedy receivers and getting speedy players and corners. Everyone's drafting four three corners. Um, okay, let's get guys that are bigger than him that can still separate, but can still win those positional jump balls. And the ability to run the gauntlet that Keon Coleman was able to do may have been a target for the Bills from day one. I liked Keon Coleman early on in the process. I was a little bit, caught off by, that 40 time, but ultimately speaking, like he was a guy targeted in the first round. And the Bills even said on their embedded, like real closely, like, good. They were happy because they know how good of a football player he was. And the Bills now may have a chance at him then because he may have gone top 20 with the 40 score. And Brian Thomas Jr., look, the Jags traded back and then took him. So you can't sit here and convince to me how much they overly wanted him. They traded back and ultimately didn't feel like anyone would come get him anyways. I mean, it was a minor trade back to where they selected him. The Bills could have absolutely come up and traded some picks to go get Brian Thomas Jr. had they had him. But I'm still going to go on the stance that beside the top three, the Bills had Brian Thomas Jr. in the same tier as Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, and whomever else may be there as well, that they would have put into that tier. I really do believe that. That's why they were willing, in case catastrophe hit, they didn't really care about missing out on Worthy. Something they look at, they didn't really care. I mean, Keon Coleman was clearly their guy because otherwise they would have taken Worthy or Leggett.
Yeah, I mean, Bean said that they had 4 first-round grades on wide receivers, right?
He just said that they were off the board. Did he actually say 4? I didn't think he.
I don't know if he's specified and said. I thought he said that they had graded 4 wide receivers with first-round grades, which in that case would put Brian Thomas in that other tier. But I don't know if that was specifically his quote and where that cutoff line was, because we talked about Brian Thomas as kind of being that one in the middle where he's not in the top 3 tier, but he's also not in the Keon Coleman, Xavier Leggett, Ladd McConkey tier, or maybe he was. So I don't know exactly where the Bills had Brian Thomas rated, but I think based on how this draft played out, I would say that he would be more towards the tier that you mentioned than the top 3 of Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze.
It'd be interesting to admit, basically, that way, if he said it exactly like that, that would be admitting that you had Brian Thomas above Keon Coleman and calling Keon Coleman a second round pick. I don't know. Like that seems like a weird play for him, who's usually pretty tactical. But I think more the point being, the Bills had definitely designed that they wanted Keon Coleman, and if Keon Coleman had gone, I thought they probably felt pretty good with whether it was Ladder or Leggett. We'll never really know where they was because all these guys went from 28 obviously to 34. We'll never really, and it's a really good range per my statistics pre-draft. That's a great range to draft a player, as we know the success rate there is mighty high as you get into like the Brian Thomas range is always a little bit scary. Guys in the top 10 seem to hit, but then that 12 to 23 range has been dangerous to teams in the NFL draft. But then the 23 to 36 range has been very nice to teams in the NFL draft. Hence why we saw Worthy, we saw Ricky Pearsall, obviously we saw Leggett, Keon Coleman, and then Alad McConkey right in a row. So I do believe there's going to be some hits within that unit of players. We talked about all of them all offseason, like almost every single one of them, to varying levels, and maybe Ricky Pearsall not as much. But we talked about pretty much that whole unit fairly extensively throughout our time here on the Going Deep Buffalo show and throughout all of our network. Those were guys we talked about. And I think there's going to be some big hits from this class in there. And hopefully Keon Coleman's one of them. And it isn't just Leggett or Lad McConkey, because those would sting more than, say, Brian Thomas would. The Bills really didn't have a huge chance to trade up multiple assets to get one of those top three guys. We'll never really know where they had Brian Thomas Jr. And then if they miss on Worthy, Leggett, I guess even Pearsall to some extent, that'll hurt a little bit more, as the Bills had the control of picking the fifth receiver on the board. They had their choice. And you'd have to believe that trading a swap up wouldn't have been enough to lose out on. If it was Worthy, I don't think it was. The Bills knew what they were doing. They absolutely knew the Panthers were taking Leggett. So I do think that Keon Coleman was their fifth receiver, and they felt comfortable with getting the extra commission, what I like to call it, of Dwayne Carter on top of it. Do you feel that way? You don't feel like the Bills would have had Worthy or Leggett above Coleman? That wouldn't make any sense, would it?
I think if they liked Leggett that much, they would have just taken him at 32. Like, you don't even
maybe
if
28.
Yeah, like even if you don't know exactly what the teams are doing, if he's your guy, you're gonna get him. And clearly he wasn't their guy because they didn't get him. Because we were talking like, oh, would it be a reach to get Leggett at 28? Is it still a reach to get him at 32? And it's like, you know what? You can't be picking between 5 to 10 picks here and say, I got to get this precisely. I got to be perfect here. Because if you think that he is going to fit in with your offense and you like him, I don't care. Get him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if you reach 4 spots by whoever's board. Like, if he's ranked like the 34th best player and you take him at 32, who cares? Especially like 5 years down the road, if he's playing like a Pro Bowler or an All Pro, are you really going to look back and say, well, we kind of drafted him out of place, but I'm glad it worked out? No one's going to talk about that. So I think that they kind of deliberately did that, because I think I would agree. Like, Keon Coleman had to be their guy, because I don't think it was just a toss up and say, yeah, we'll just trade back at the extra fifth, and whoever the Panthers take, we'll take the opposite. Like, I think they had to have a plan of saying, we want Keon Coleman, so we will trade with Carolina, because if they want to Leggett, they would have just taken him.
And I also ultimately feel like if they had a guy sticking out on their board, and if they and that goes for Worthy too, I don't think you even risk making that move if you don't ultimately if you like him more than the others. You wouldn't risk it over the pick swap that they had there. So I think that I agree with you. I don't think that there's any world that the Bills were risking their top choice in their offense because they needed a little sugar on a trade back. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't mean that they're going to draft properly or that they're going to be right with who they selected, but it does say to me that Keon Coleman was very much so the guy that was in like let's put this up real quick on the screen. Kevin, do you think that this is possible? Like, I mean, come on, 200 to 141, that really would have been the difference in Leggett? Like, no, absolutely not. Like, they obviously had Keon Coleman, but what did 141 allow them to do? It allowed them to take Cedric Van Pran Granger and feel comfortable with doing so, because Ray Davis needed to be selected in the 4th round. So essentially, the Bills also got Dwayne Carter out of this. They were in position to get Van Pran Granger and obviously not worry about selecting Ray Davis and having to select between Ray Davis and Van Pran Granger. If they had not made the second trade back, they would have had to pick between Ray Davis and Van Pran Granger. Like, they were on the clock deciding that decision. And they would have lost Van Pran Granger without that Carolina trade back. And also the KC trade back allowed them to take Dwayne Carter. So you're adding legitimate players here beyond just the sugar of, is Worthy going to be better than Keon Coleman? Chiefs fans cope and tell you that, like, oh, we got Hicks, he was the number 1 player on our board. Like, absolutely not. Like like he was just a guy that was on the board when you were selecting. And if you loved him that much, you would have just taken him with your original third round pick anyways. But the Bills were able to get Davis, Van Perrin Granger, and also Dwayne Carter because of these trade backs. Like at some point, that's worth it, right?
Yeah, and I guess that goes back to my original point tonight is that this draft could turn into an A-plus draft if we look back and say, wow, even though people might say you gave Kansas City Xavier Worthy, like I said last week, this could turn into, wow, Kansas City gave Buffalo Dwayne Carter. So we think that just because Kansas City has our number and everything works out for them and it doesn't work out for us, that everyone thinks that Xavier Worthy is going to turn into this great all-pro player, the next Tyreek Hill, and the Bills are just going to continue to fall short. But it really could work in the opposite direction, where maybe Worthy doesn't work out, and you're looking at Dwayne Carter as a really serviceable backup who can potentially turn into a Pro Bowler, an all-pro himself. And then you say, man, like Bean really crushed that 24 draft, how he was able to get that third round pick, how he's able to get that extra fifth and still get Keon Coleman.
Absolutely. Because Bean admitted that when you do a one pick trade back, you know who the team's take. He said that in his press conference. That's how we know that. So I would assume, knowing Dan Morgan, they said, we're not trading with you unless you tell it. Like, we're just not going to do it. Like, they may have even discussed that one of them, like Coleman, one of them, like Leggett, whatever it may be. But the Bills, Brandon Bean had said, in a one pick trade scenario, you generally speaking know who they're coming up for. Otherwise, you're going to stay and make that pick. It's not worth the trade I just put on the board. On our screen, because if you didn't know. So they claim they didn't know they wanted Worthy. I think they claim that, but they definitely do not claim that they didn't. They knew. Brandon Bean said, when you do a scenario where you make a one pick trade back, you know who they're coming up for. So that is something he said.
Well, before we put a bow on this, Kevin, here, I just want to remind everyone to make sure you subscribe to Built in Buffalo and make sure you smash that like here, as it helps us able to create this content for you guys. Make sure you give Kevin and I a follow as well. So putting a bow on this here, Kevin. So we talked about what the Bills could still potentially do at wide receiver, some players that they could potentially add. And we talked about this philosophical change, right? And how we think Joe Brady wants to orchestrate this offense. So now putting it all together, who makes the most sense? Does Deebo still make the most sense? Or someone like a Tyler Lockett, who would just be like a vertical deep threat? Like, what skill set, what role did the Bills need here? Because I still think there is room for one more, because right now the Bills have a lot of big-bodied receivers who are willing blockers. And I don't think, to my point earlier, that they're just going to be a run-heavy team. Like, you still have Josh Allen. So who complements that philosophical approach the most and can help Josh Allen in the passing game?
Man, I mean, I think they had the big bodies, as you brought him up on the screen earlier. I don't know that Michael Thomas would, but if they're really going for it, I mean, they could go that route. But I think that speedier, do-all type of player that can add a real strain to a defense, the rack, the yak, the in the backfield, the rushing guards. Deebo Samuel just jumps out to what Joe Brady would want. It just is the kind of player. Like, they signed Curtis Samuel. If you're on a lower budget end range, you could look at a Terrence Marshall from Carolina, on what he was able to do with him at LSU with OBJ, or excuse me, with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So, like, ultimately, that's where I'm not sitting here saying, like, he's the best player in the league, he's the only player the Bills should target. I'm saying that I think that he matches what the opening could be on what the Bills know. So that's kind of what I think. How about you?
Sorry, say that again. I was reading the comments.
How about you? What do you think the Bills would add, final piece to the Bills offense?
Oh, right. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I think Deebo Samuel probably does make the most sense, because I'm trying to think about it from, what are the Bills going to do when they line up week 1, right? So they're going to come out 12 personnel. They're going to hand the ball off to James Cook. And then when it's third and short, if Josh Allen doesn't keep it, you're going to give it to Ray Davis to plow his way through. And once you start to get the run game going, you get the defense to come up and make you respect that run game. And that's when you take the top off. So do you want a vertical deep threat, or do you want someone who can get open in space and then get the yards after the catch? So I feel like, personally, I would say like a Tyler Lockett, because that fits my scheme the best, where, the defense comes up to respect the run game, and then you get Lockett to burn them. I mean, Deebo Samuel can, but I think a Samuel is more of a wide receiver who performs around the line of scrimmage or the first down yard marker, and then he takes off, and that's where he does his damage. So I think he does hit the most of his work around the line of scrimmage, even behind the line of scrimmage, and up to 10 to 20 yards, and then he lets his speed do the rest. I mean, can Deebo Samuel just be a straight vertical deep threat, you think? Because I feel like Joe Brady would want to use him the way I described.
Yeah, I mean, I think he does everything that you would need him to do. 4.48 speed. I mean, I think he can pretty much do it. I mean, he's got that vert that they've been pretty interested in. The vert score of 39, which is a 9.27 RAS. He's still almost 6 foot 215. He's a big guy. I think he does everything that the Bills and Joe Brady would want from a receiver. But just straight burner raw speed, I don't know. But it hasn't seemed like, if that was the philosophical interest, I mean, obviously they would have gone Worthy. So I don't overly know that. I think they're looking for that rack, especially now that they have some of those flyers on those 6'4" guys, that they're going to be seeing how many of those make the roster. So for me, I'm still leading Deebo Samuel, but that doesn't mean that, like, you could still go with that bigger body contested catch guy and Courtland Sutton, a guy that has beat the Bills on a ridiculous fourth down play in the end zone. They just tossed it up and made a ridiculous play. If that's where they're going with it, it's possible. But I think the rack, the yak, the speed, the versatility, it does check the boxes to go with Samuel. It really does. I mean, he is a player that would fit perfectly in Joe Brady's offense. And just another piece like Khalil Shakir, another piece like bigger body guys and Matt Collins and Keon Coleman and Shavers and Claypool.
Yeah, because, I don't know if a Joe Brady offense necessarily needs someone to run 60 yards down the field. I think that's more of a Ken Dorsey offense. So I think what we're looking at here, you have two groups of receivers. The bigger bodied receivers who can go up and make the tough catch, and then they can also help pave the way for the running game. And then you have the speedy separators, right? Like the Curtis Samuels, the Khalil Shakirs, and maybe in this case, it would be Deebo Samuel. So I don't know if Joe Brady necessarily needs like a gunner, so to speak, not like a special teams gunner, but like someone to literally just be like sorry to bring this name up, but Xavier Worthy, 50 yards down the field, turn the Jets on. There you go. I think what we're looking at here is you get the bigger guys in Coleman, Claypool, Shorter. Who's the other one that I'm missing? Matt Collins. And then you have the Shakirs and maybe both Samuels to work in space.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And I think that the dual Samuels could be an ultimate push for the Bills. And Curtis Samuel is a really good guy. He's in the intermediate range. And Deebo Samuel is just a separator. And ultimately, it is something we've talked about Josh Allen liking. I don't think he changed what he liked just because they drafted Keon Coleman, and who can also Brandon Beane, whether you believe him or not. We're going back and forth on whether we're believing or not believing what Brandon Beane is saying, but claims he's one of the better separators and definitely is really good at creating his own space. So a lot of arguments going to say he's a contested catch guy, but to Brandon Beane, at least per his comments, is also a separator that we've always talked about him wanting. Whether that's true or not, it's just like anything else. Do we believe him that he wanted Worthy? Like that, some of the things we've talked about. I tend to believe most things Brandon Beane says. He throws in a little bit of fluff. But then, here's me saying that I don't buy his $10 million they can't make a move thing. Just because practically that doesn't make any sense for them to sit on $10 million. They wouldn't have post June 1st Trey White, in my opinion. They would have predated it and taken the hit this year and not put any money on the cap next year. So that's a tell to me. Otherwise they would have been operating the same way that they are now, and would have cut him with a pre-June 1st cut slot. There's no other reason to do that. unless you plan to utilize that $10 million. You're going to have some for in-season money, sure, a little bit of extra. But then he goes on to say, well, we can do something. So Beane's going to always say like, oh, that wasn't like a large move by any stretch. The 49ers, 10 million or whatever he's going to end up saying.
Well, I will say Keon Coleman can become a better separator for a few reasons. Number one, he's still only 20 years old. And speaking from experience, I have grown a lot since I was a 20-year-old. Like,
sure.
I know it's different because Keon Coleman is, 6'3", 215 or 6'4", whatever. But I was a little pipsqueak years ago. I think your body grows a lot, and I think he can just become stronger and quicker, number one. Number two, the quarterback has a lot to do with it because Jordan Travis maybe wasn't placing the ball in the right spots, and Josh Allen is such a better quarterback than he's played with before. And number three, if they do what I said, where you get the defense to come up and make them respect that run game, Coleman's going to find himself open a lot more easily than if this was a Ken Dorsey offense where it's just like, okay, go run 20 yards down the field and try to get open.
Agreed. So we're going to have to monitor this and more coming up on future shows. Maybe we'll have some special guest players and receivers and other players on the show at some point, as well as our schedule show next week. We're going to be here now. Wednesdays, we've been lucky. We're going to have the Schedule Elite show here on the Built in Buffalo podcast network. We're going to be talking about the schedule. We're going to be breaking down what we think. It looks like we will have the full schedule in hand this time next week to go over our favorite games, what we're looking forward to, schedule predictions. We'll do it all next week on the schedule show. So we're pretty lucky that, I guess we won't be technically making predictions, but we will be breaking down the schedule as we see it. Anything that we see, we'll obviously be tweeting out throughout the day, that day as well, with schedule leaks and breaks that are going on. So it'll be definitely a fun show to tune in for and see kind of see how it all builds out with the Bills schedule and the potential schedule. But as always, we appreciate everybody tuning in today, especially for a time slot at 8 p.m. Thank you so much. It's the summer. We want you guys to go out and have fun and listen to us after your days are over. To the Summit Center, thank you so much for the best autism care in Western New York, and Larson-Timko and Dave Dengler as well, Larson-Timko Funeral Home. So we really, really appreciate all of our sponsors as well. Kevin, give us some final thoughts as we go into the schedule and we go into the dead of May and June. What do you got for us?
Well, it's a question for you, actually. Well, two questions. First of all, what time is the schedule coming out next Wednesday?
I don't know if they've released the schedule show yet. They'll drop that at some point soon. They haven't said the exact time, but usually it's around 7.
Okay, so we'll probably know a good amount of the results by the time we're live. So that being said, my second and main question here, what are your predictions? This will be like our final sign-off here. Any big predictions? How many primetime games are the Bills getting? Do they open up finally at home at 1 o'clock again? Are they going to be on the road primetime? When is the Stephon Diggs game? When do they play Kansas City? I mean, there's a lot here. So, I mean, any hot takes before we sign off?
I'm going 5 primetime games. I think in Bills and Houston will be a big time matchup on the schedule. I'm going Bills Houston as a really good battle with the Diggs, with CJ Stroud versus Josh Allen, with basically 2 of the top 4 remaining teams. Obviously, the Bills Chiefs is always a game, but that is one that I have slated for. Obviously, the majority, the final 4 AFC teams are all going to play each other, so those are all going to be big games. With the Bills Houston game, and I'm predicting they open up at home against the Arizona Cardinals. That is my prediction right now.
I can see that. They usually take one of those teams out west and bring them here in like September. Like last year, it was the Raiders. This year, it could be the Cardinals. I got to be honest. I really haven't even looked into our opponents yet because I was so focused on, first of all, free agency and the draft. So we're playing the AFC West, right?
Yes.
And then AFC South?
You mean the NFC West, right?
Is it? Oh, yeah. Because
we mean the NFC. Yes, they play the NFC West, correct? And then they play the AFC South, correct? Jacksonville, Indy.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I gotta do a better job of looking at. I mean, this is what we have the whole week for because, like you said, it's about to be the dead time. So I don't really have any hot takes, but I'm going to say 6 primetime games. I think that the Bills are still a big ticket with Josh Allen, and I think that he sells, he rates. And especially now with the new look Bills, I mean, Buffalo, Miami, that could be a primetime game with the Jordan Poyer matchup.
Right.
Bills, Jets, with Rodgers being healthy, they could put that in
Those
prime
two could
time.
always be possible. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, maybe those are like a 425 game. I could see Miami being week 18 again if they think that the season or the division could come down to week 18. They might put Buffalo and Miami again week 18. Maybe they send Miami to Buffalo in week 18 this year.
And by the way, it's going to be released. The NFL has already announced it does not come out tomorrow. The NFL has released that it comes out the 15th at 8 p.m. So not at this point, there has been no leaks though.
Yeah, I
So we'll
haven't
be
seen
live with the
it.
schedule. Maybe Kevin, we might have to go at some point. We alter our start time next week based on maybe making it in hand, or maybe we'll go a little bit early if we can to kind of talk about our final predictions before we get a drop of live on the show. So there's a couple, but there's always leaks. I would imagine by 5, 6 p.m. there'll be some version of a leak that's pretty close to the actual schedule.
Yeah, all those accounts will try to be like the head
And
honcho,
some
but
of them
they're
are
all
right.
like, according to sources, like, I'm going to be the one to break this news. And then everyone's talking about it. And it's like, okay, well, so much for the schedule coming out at 7 or 8 because half of it came out by 4 o'clock.
Yeah, absolutely. But we really appreciate everybody tuning into this. We almost went an hour and a half today. We're glad to be able to talk about our offensive philosophical changes. As always, we'll be here live next week. Look out for our show next week. Right here Wednesday, we're going to be breaking down the schedule. So we're fun to be part of that action. Maybe we'll bring in some guests if we can find anybody to talk about their favorite games. We'll see what we're going to bring for you next week. But we're pretty excited about the schedule release show heading into OTAs as well. We have some stuff to talk about. But really appreciate everybody being here for us. As always, Wednesdays, great to be here. The Going Deep Buffalo Show. Kevin and Kevin, we'll be back at you next week talking about the schedule. Grab the schedule in hand, and we'll have live reaction just like you guys will. So we'll catch you all soon. We'll catch you all next week, and really looking forward to seeing how this schedule plays out and breaking it down for you. See you next week.